I went to a baby shower with some girls that I used to work with. And this girl, her whole life had changed. I mean, she was happy, she was expecting a baby she didn't think she could have. Her marriage was fantastic, and I was like, what in the world have you done? Like, I need some of that. She said, I started serving. I, gave everything over to God. I started serving at church and going every Sunday, and like, this girl's lost her mind. I was like, okay, whatever. And then by the end of the shower, she was like, listen, you don't have to go to church. She was like, just watch it online at home. Just see what you think. She's like, I really think you might like it. The first sermon that I watched was the Greater Than series, and I was hooked. Just kept it on. It just played and played and played and played. Jason really hits home. The way he delivers his messages and can make it relate to everyday life and, help you understand something that's so big and sometimes really difficult to understand. I think having kids really changes people. It's a miracle in itself. You can't explain how. It's just hard to understand how it actually works. And then out of nowhere, she didn't sleep until she was 18, 19 months old. I was a horrible sleeper. I mean, I'm talking screaming for hours on hours. She just didn't sleep. Didn't like it, didn't want to have anything to do with it. Put her in the car. About 5 minutes into it, she was out. So I was like, whew. And I just kept driving and driving like any other day. And then I ended up in the middle of nowhere in Revolution Church's parking lot. I looked over and, it's like the middle of November, and there's a group of ladies planting flowers outside the church. I was like, that's kind of strange. And she woke up screaming as loud as she could, just out of nowhere. And I was like, okay. And my wallet had dumped over, and there was this money. And I said, I gotta get out of the car. So I grabbed it, and I grabbed her, and I ended up walking up to the front doors of this huge church that I'd never been to before. And there were these ladies outside, and I told her, I don't know how I got here. I'm not really sure why I'm here, but here's like $30-something that I've been watching the sermons online, so here. She looked at me funny. She goes, I think maybe we should go inside. And I told her I was watching the sermons online for a couple weeks, and that Jason really struck a chord with me, and I was really intrigued and wanted to learn more. And she was like, oh, well, that's my husband. My name's Lindsay. Her kindness even set a greater tone for my connection with the church. She took the time to talk to me about Jesus. She gave me my first Bible, which is a pretty big thing when you've never had one before. And it just shows that there's, the whole place is just filled with love and kindness every day, every second, and there are people that'll help you. And it's not an easy journey for everybody. And there's a support system there. You just have to look for it and accept it when it randomly shows up in your day. Something over watching and on the Sundays, it just something got a hold of me and convinced me that it wasn't for me. I wasn't good enough to be baptized. It wasn't in my plan. I could just do everything else, but I wasn't supposed to do that. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't worthy, whatever. The convictions that come into your life and keep you from doing those things, and it won, and I didn't do it, and it was just still there. It was still there, and I knew it was something I had to do. It was something I was supposed to do, and I decided I was going to do it the Tuesday before the Sunday of baptism, and I said, okay, I'm just going to do it. I know that, this is what God wants me to do. I just know, and I made that decision, and I said, man, I really wish that I would have decided Sunday so I could have asked Lindsay. And I prayed about it, and finally I just said, okay, fine. Said it out loud in my bedroom in the middle of the night. I said, okay, if I run into her between this Tuesday night and Sunday morning, I'll just ask her. And the next day, Wednesday night at Publix, I ran right into her at the deli. Of course, she said yes, and we're crying and hugging together in the middle of Publix. And So it was really special for her to do that for me and be such a big part in my beginning and a really pivotal point in my journey.
Yeah. Such an amazing story. I'll never forget, Lindsay called me that day. She's like, I'm up here planting flowers, and you're not gonna believe what just happened. And she told me, I'm like, well, yeah, I believe it, because God is good like that. And we love sharing those stories, because that story, again, is just a microcosm, one story of what God came to give us. We've been in this series called Fully Alive. If you've been here, you know about it. If you're new today, maybe you don't. But this series that we've been talking about that our calling as Christians is to be fully alive. Not just to be alive, not just to stay alive, but to experience life and to experience to the full, because that's why Jesus came. And it's built on one verse in John chapter 10, verse 10. So if you have a Bible, you can go ahead and turn to John chapter 10. If you don't, as always, we'll have it here on the screen. But I'm gonna read this verse again, because I want to come back to it every week to remind ourselves of why he came. But as always, I want you to help me with it, all right? So when we get to the part that's highlighted in blue, I want you to say it, all right? Even if you're watching online, just talk to your computer screen, and everybody in Starbucks will know that you're weird, all right? So John chapter 10, verse 10, all right, says this: "The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come that they may have," what? "And have it to the full." That was good. Let's try that again. "I have come that they may have and have it to the full." That was good, all right? You're still getting thawed out, so that's all right, I understand. Jesus said, "I have come that they may have life, that may experience it, may possess it, may live in it, and have it to the full." And so the good news of the gospel is not just that Jesus died for us, but that he came back to life again, proving that he alone has the power to give life. He has the eternal life that beats death, and he came to give us that life. He came for us to experience that life, and he wants us to have it to the full. And if you've been here, we said that yes, he came to give us that, but so many of us don't experience that. And the reason is because there's also a thief that comes. There's also a thief that comes to take that life from us, to steal that life from us, to kill that life in us. And so we talked last week about how we have to discern between the people that are coming to us, who is approaching us, who is in our life, and why are they in our life. And we have to learn how to listen, to distinguish between the voices, because Jesus said that his sheep know his voice. And so we have to learn to listen to the right voices and to hear the right things. And then Jesus said he goes ahead of us and his sheep follow him. And we said that really the key to experiencing this full life is following Jesus. And so we run away from our sin, and we listen to his voice as he calls us out and calls us into life with him. And so I've tried to do my best over the last couple weeks to help us understand that, but I always want to come back to this verse to remind us of that, because it's so, we get so forgetful, we don't remember exactly why he came. Because unfortunately, a lot of us, especially if you're new to Jesus or church, we think that Jesus came not to give us life, but that he came to give us laws. We think that's what Christianity is. It's just a bunch of rules, and if you follow those rules, then God loves you. But I tried to do my best in the first week of this series to help us understand that yes, God did give us laws. That was his first grace to us, but he gave us grace in the place of that grace. He gave us more grace because he understands, and we need to understand, that we don't get life by obeying the laws. We get life by receiving it. So God sent Jesus to obey all the laws in our place for our sin, and now he gives us life. And so when we follow Jesus, he doesn't necessarily lead us into more laws, he leads us into more life. And yes, there are ways that God wants us to live. Yes, he has commandments that he wants us to follow, but what we need to understand is those all are about life. And so he's leading us into his life, and he's got boundaries, he's got a direction he wants us to go, but it's in following him that we experience that full life. Now in John 10, again, if you have your Bible, we're gonna be in verses 11 through 15. Jesus is going to help us again. He's gonna give us another analogy to distinguish between who he is and who other people are. And it's important for us to know this because of what he's going to say. So let's jump in verse 11 and we'll work our way down to verse 15. Jesus says this: I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. He abandons the sheep and runs away. Now, Jesus has been giving us metaphors. He's helping us understand who he is, and he calls himself the shepherd. And he's used this analogy, we talked about it last week. A shepherd is one who tends for, who cares, who leads sheep. And so sheep are the people of God. They are people who follow Jesus. But then Jesus has given us several analogies to understand the other people that are coming to us. Last week, he introduced the thief, right? We talked about the thief who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Then he also said the stranger. The stranger is a voice we don't recognize or know. And then today he says the wolf. Now, all three of those can describe the same person or the same type of person. And sometimes they're used to reference Satan. But I told you last week, it's not necessarily meaning Satan in and of himself, but he lies to a lot of people. He can obviously influence a lot of people. And so there's a lot of thieves, a lot of strangers, and a lot of wolves that come to attack us. But he uses this analogy of the wolf to help us understand, again, who's coming and why they're coming. Because if you think about a wolf, right, that big bad wolf, remember all the fairy tales, right? A wolf comes to attack. It comes to devour, right? They're scavengers. They attack. They care nothing for the sheep. And so it's important for us, it's imperative for us to understand that not everybody has our best interest in heart. That not every direction that we go down is going to lead to life. And so we have to, this is why I said last week, we have to learn to discern. We have to listen. We have to distinguish. We have to follow the right people. We have to follow the good shepherd. Because that word good there means flawless. It means the best. It means the one who is there to lead us. And he said last week to lead us into pasture, to lead us into life, to lead us into growth. But we need to understand that we will be attacked by a wolf. But then he introduces another analogy here when he says a hired hand. Now, a hired hand, literally, the best way to describe it is a day laborer or a day worker. It's like going to get somebody and just paying them $10 an hour to do a job for you for that day, right? You don't have to get them to fill out a 1099. You don't have to get insurance information on them. They don't have to sign any kind of employee covenant agreement, right? No compete clauses, none of that kind of stuff. You just go get them, you hire them for the day, you pay them, and then the relationship is done. And so this idea of a hired hand, Jesus is contrasting himself from hired hands, people who don't care for the sheep. Now, I do think that this hired hand can reference people who's supposed to care for the sheep. So it can be a reference to pastors, it can be a reference to church leaders, to staff, to volunteers. And what he's helping us to understand is the difference between someone who really cares for the sheep and someone who doesn't care for the sheep. Now you have to indulge me a little bit because I'm gonna talk about my people, all right? People like me who work for a church or volunteer in a church. Unfortunately, I just know with the church our size, some of you, if not a lot of you, have been hurt by people who worked for the church or who volunteered at a church or who claimed to be Christians. Some of you, unfortunately, have had interactions with pastors or church leaders or volunteers who have been more like hired hands than they have good shepherds. And my call as a pastor and our call as a church is to be more like the good shepherd than the hired hand. And here's the distinguishing characteristic between the two. He tells us. The distinguishing characteristic is the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. That's what the good shepherd does. Amazingly, this phrase lays down is literally the Greek word, and I've said this before if you've been here, literally the Greek word, if you just brought it over into English, is tithe me. That's the word for lay down. And so what Jesus is saying is, I tithed me. I tithed myself. The word means to give or to lay aside, to put aside what you possess. And so Jesus is saying, you know a good shepherd because a good shepherd lays down their life. A good shepherd sacrifices themselves, and they sacrifice themselves for the sheep. And that phrase there, for, it's a preposition which means on behalf of. So Jesus is saying, I sacrificed myself, my life, everything of who I am. I tithe myself on behalf of the sheep. And then he says, a hired hand, when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep. Why? Because a hired hand isn't in it for the sheep. What are they in it for? Johnny Manziel, right? The money. Sorry, I couldn't help myself. He is actually from my hometown, and I could tell you all about his family, but I won't. They're in it for the money. Now, some of you, that's all you're gonna think about the entire sermon, all right? You know a hired hand because when the wolf comes, they don't lay down their life. And they for sure don't do it on behalf of the sheep. Why? Because they're not in it on behalf of the sheep. They're in it on behalf of themselves. That's how you know. When the wolf comes, notice Jesus didn't say if the wolf comes. He said when. It's not if he comes, it's when he comes. Because he's coming. A wolf, a thief, a stranger, they are coming to you and they do not have your best interest in heart. Why? Because they will not sacrifice themselves on your behalf. They will not lay down their life on your behalf because they're not good shepherds. They're only in it for the money. They're only in it for themselves. And unfortunately, there have been pastors like that. There have been pastors like that. There have been church leaders like that. There have been Christians like that. Who only come to church on behalf of themselves. This is why we ask you to tithe. This is why we ask you to give, because you can't love without sacrifice. You can't love without giving of yourself. My marriage would be so much easier if I didn't have to lay down my life. Right? My life would be so much easier if my kids and my wife just laid down their life on my behalf and treated me as a king and treated me as a Lord, right? And that's the mirage. Some of us have gone down that road. Oh, she treats me better. Oh, he treats me better. He gives me attention. She gives me attention. Yeah, homie, but that ain't love. Because love isn't a feeling. Whoa, feelings. It's an action. It's a verb. Love equals laying down my life. So love is the most costly thing. But here's what Jesus is saying. When someone lays down their life, when someone loves you that much to lay down their life, that's when you experience life. That's when you experience being fully alive. So he's contrasting again himself from hired hands. And here's what I want you to understand, particularly in this text. Our church, Revolution Church, we are not perfect. I just want to say that. I say it often. I'm not perfect. And if you think if you could just have a conversation with me, ask my wife, it doesn't fix everything. Right? I mean, we're not perfect. But here's one thing you can know, and I want you to know from our church. We are doing our best not to be hired hands. Our staff, our elders, our leaders, our volunteers, the entire reason why we do what we do is on your behalf. It's on your behalf. It's for you. It's because of you. We do it laying down our life for you. Because we're doing our best to be like our shepherd. And we're not perfect, and we're gonna get it wrong. There are gonna be times where we may fail you. There are gonna be times where we may not do what we should have done or didn't step in the right moment in the right way. But here's what I want you to understand. We're gonna break ourselves on your behalf. We're gonna do everything we can to care for you, to love you, to lead you into the life that Jesus wants you to have. Why? Because we know there are wolves coming. And you say, okay, what's a wolf? It could be Satan himself, but sometimes the Bible says a wolf is a false teacher, a wolf in sheep's clothing, someone who's pretending to be something that they're not. And I just want to let you know something. Every staff member on this church staff, we have done our best to get to know them, and we help them understand that their entire role here is to lay down their life for you. This is why we don't want a lot of people on our staff, because there's not a lot of people like that. And those of you that volunteer, the reason why some of you don't volunteer is because you see what our volunteers do and you think, man, I can't lay down my life like that. You mean sit out in a parking lot when it's 20 degrees? But why do they do it? Why do our production teams serve all day? Why do our kids volunteers endure being thrown up on? My goodness, why do our middle school and high school volunteers hang out with a bunch of weirdos called teenagers? Because we've just all decided that the sheep are worth it. The sheep are worth it. They're worth laying our life down for. We have a cause that we're living for, and that cause isn't our own comfort. And so if you want to be a good shepherd, if you want to be a good husband, if you want to be a good wife, if you want to be a good employee, if you want to be a good leader, be a servant. Interestingly enough, when the first church was created, in Acts chapter 6, it tells us that the apostles were getting overrun by requests. And so they created this position called deacons. And the Greek word for deacon means servant. It means to serve. And so the orphans and the widows weren't getting served. They couldn't do it. So the church raised up some leaders and they said, you go serve those people because they deserve to be served, but we can't do it all. And somewhere along the way in church world, deacon went from being a servant to being a tyrant. It went from being a guy who sacrifices his life to a guy who smokes a cigarette outside and then comes in for the business meeting to vote. Sorry, I've got some pinned up childhood, emotional issues. But you know what I'm saying? That's the essence of a church leader. Why? Because if I'm a shepherd in the house of God, then I'm going to be, or I should be, like my shepherd who lays down his life. And so what I'm saying to you is this. We know as a church that you're gonna be attacked. It's not an if, it's a when. And we don't wanna be the kind of people that run away when you get attacked. We don't wanna be like that. We want to step in as best as we possibly can and love you and care for you. That's why we have the leaders that we have. That's why we have the staff that we have. That's why we have small groups. That's why we have leaders in every age group, because you're worth it. And we're doing our best to follow the lead of our shepherd. Now, Jesus goes on. Listen to what else he says. He says, then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand, and here's the clincher, cares nothing for the sheep. Now, a couple things I want to pick up on here. First is this. You have to understand that when a wolf attacks, he's got two primary goals, he or she. When a wolf attacks, their two primary goals are this. It says he attacks and scatters. That word attack literally means to gain control over. It means to gain control over. Because the wolf knows, a thief knows, a stranger knows that a sheep is under the direction and care of a shepherd. So that literally means that to be a sheep, you can't be a sheep without being under the direction and control of a shepherd. So if you're a sheep, if you're a Christian, you're under the direction and control of a shepherd. You have a shepherd who is good, who leads you out into life, who leads you into fullness. But what a wolf is trying to do is he's trying to wrestle control away from the shepherd. He is trying to get the sheep to no longer be under the direction and influence of the shepherd. And so what happens, and if this has not happened to you, then you haven't lived long enough yet. What happens is he comes in and he lies. This is exactly what happened to Adam and Eve in the garden. He comes in and he lies, and he gets us to believe that the shepherd does not have our best intention in heart. He is not leading us into life. And if we would just take control of the situation, if we would just wrestle away control from the shepherd, if we would just go a different direction, and that's what the word scatter means. The word scatter means to send off in different directions. So picture this, here's a shepherd, here's a sheep moving this direction. The wolf attacks and tries to gain control of those sheep and get them to go this direction. Why? Because when a sheep is alone, when a sheep is abandoned, it's the most vulnerable. I don't know if you've ever dealt much with herds, but the strength is in numbers, right? But if you can get one of them away, then you can kill them. And so what begins to happen is we begin to believe the lies that the shepherd's not leading us into life. If we would just take control, this is called the illusion of control. We try to think that we really have control over our life, and we describe it by saying, like, this is what I feel I should do. And so then he wrestles control away. We don't listen to our shepherd anymore. We quit listening to his voice. We start going this direction, and we think we've been led into life only to be attacked and devoured. Why? Because when you're alone, you're the most vulnerable. One of my dad's buddies that he grew up with was really into animals, and I'll never forget the first time he introduced me or showed me his fainting goat. Anybody know about fainting goats? It's a real deal. Real deal Holyfield, all right? I mean, it's an unbelievable, I don't know how in the world scientists did this, but they bred into a goat that when they have anxiety and fear, they faint. Literally, bred it into a goat. And so what herders will do is they will put one fainting goat in their herd. And when a wolf comes and they get tense, they get anxious, and they normally run off together, the fainting goat stiffens up and, I kid you not, falls over and faints. I didn't believe it till I saw it. My dad's buddy, his old country boys from South Arkansas, he got on his tractor and was like, watch this. You know that's how a redneck's about to get in trouble. It's like, hold my beer, watch this. And so he gets on his tractor, there's the herd of the sheep, and he just takes off for them. I mean, just, and then the herd goes this way, and then that fainting goat starts to run, and then those back legs stiffen up, and then they fall over. Faint. Herd moves on. Why? Because a wolf will eat that goat, and the rest will leave. Because that goat is now alone. That goat is now isolated, or sheep, or whatever. Here's my point. You and I, when the shepherd is leading us, he's always leading us as a group. It's called the church. He's always leading us as a community. He's always leading us as a flock. And good shepherds, under shepherds, will lead the church, lead the flock, lead the group to listen to the shepherd. But what's gonna happen, listen to me, you can count on this. Satan's gonna come in, a wolf's gonna come in, a liar's gonna come in and try to get you separated from the flock. Why? To devour you, to gain control over you, to get you away from the group and kill you. And here's what I'm wanting you to understand. There's strength in numbers. Part of being fully alive is not being alone. Let me say it to you again. Part of being fully alive is not being alone. We are relational creatures. We are relational by nature. Even if you're introverted, you still want relationships, you just don't want it in an extroverted way. You don't want to walk into a room and mingle with everybody, but you do want a relationship with somebody. And so what I'm saying is this, part of really being led into life is not being led away from community, but into it. Into life, into relationships, into life-giving places where the church is there to care for you. And what I'm saying as a church is that's what we want for you. We don't want you to feel abandoned. We don't want you to be isolated or alone. We want you to be known and loved and cared for because we know you're gonna be attacked. So here's my point. I'd write it down if I was you. We will be attacked. You can count on that. We will be attacked, but we don't have to be abandoned. We will be attacked, but we don't have to be abandoned. Another way I could say it is, we don't have to be alone. Now, some of you, unfortunately, your families failed you in this department. And that's why God created the church. If you look at the institutions God created, he created the family, and he created the family first. Then he created the church. And he created the church to help fill the gaps where family fails. Because sin not only destroyed our relationship with God, it destroyed our relationship with each other. Now we are all self-controlled, self-indulged people who are trying to find our way, but we think it comes by being isolated or going a different direction. And what I'm saying is this, part of being fully alive is not being alone. It's not being abandoned. It's being loved and cared for in the group, in the community, in the flock that God is creating called the church. And we do our best to be that kind of church that cares for you, that loves you, that's not a hired hand, who's in it for you, who's in it with you. And so part of experiencing that is, yes, coming to church. And when I say that, I mean coming to a building, coming to a large group, not that this is the church, but it's coming to be a part of the church, that's the people. And so this is a large group gathering, and that's good because you're getting some sense of community. And I know that's hard, just like you saw in the video, to drive up to a building, to have an experience with somebody and someone you don't know. But I can tell you from my wife down, we will care for you. My wife is not too good to not stop what she's doing and engage. Now, does that mean that Lindsay and I can care for all of you? No. But we can make sure that all of you are cared for and known. That's why we have small groups. That's why we have men and women here who are willing to sacrifice and lay down their life on your behalf. That's what a small group is. A leader of a group is just someone who cares for the group. And so we've got large group on Sundays. We've got small groups that meet all throughout the week. And we want you to be in a small group. That's why we do group launch, like Chad said. And it's happening this Tuesday night. And we want you to sign up. Now, does that mean that that group leader is going to be a perfect representation of Jesus? Better. I'm just kidding. No, it doesn't mean they're going to be perfect. It just means they're going to be available. They're gonna do their best to lay down their life. Now, they got busy lives too, but they're willing to set aside some time. Why? Because they've just determined that the sheep are worth it. And so we want you to be cared. We want you to be known. We want you to be loved. And what I'm saying is, when you get attacked, if you're alone, you're probably not gonna make it. So don't be alone. Get over the fear of relationships. Get over that. It's messy, I get it. But just because one relationship failed doesn't mean you quit on it, right? Just because one church experience was bad doesn't mean you throw the whole thing out. I mean, you had one bad dating experience in middle school, but you didn't give up on it altogether, did you? And hopefully you found a good one. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. I don't know, we don't have time for counseling right now. But what I'm saying is, the shepherd, hear me, the shepherd will always lead you into community, not away from it. So anybody who's being led away from the community of God, hear me, is not following the shepherd. They can't be. Because the shepherd says, I care for my sheep. I lay down my life for my sheep. They listen to me. They follow me. They're in a group, it's plural. So sign up for group launch if you haven't. Get in a group. If you're in a group, lead a group. If you've been cared for and loved on, then care for and love on. We want you to do that. We literally can't accomplish our mission as a church if leaders don't step up and lay down their life. That's the essence of leadership. The essence of leadership means to lay down your life. It doesn't mean being loved and lauded. When someone is that kind of leader, you know they're hired hands. And this is, you gotta be careful because a lot of people, even in ministry, get into ministry not for behalf of the sheep, but because they love to be praised. They love to be loved. They have that American Idol disease. And what I mean by that is this. You ever watch, thank goodness it's kind of going off the air. I think it's run its course, right? But you ever seen that person that comes in and they audition and they're horrible, and the judges say they're horrible, and they walk out, and then there's mom, and then there's grandma, and they're like, oh, you're so awesome. They don't know what they're talking about. You can sing. Because yeah, those Grammy award-winning singers know nothing. And we put false hope, right? No, it's okay, you're loved. Why? Because that person is trying to use music to get what they really want, which is love. Affirmation. We are all affirmation junkies. And you have to be really careful, especially in church, especially in ministry, because you can have a pastor, you can have a man, you can have a woman who's leading for the praise that they get. They're not doing it for the sheep. And the way you know is when they get attacked, they run. They're not there because they don't care. And so what I'm saying here as a church is we do our best to vet our leaders. And I'm talking about myself. I'm talking about our elders. I'm talking about our staff. You can't get on this staff if you do it for the attention. This is why if somebody comes up and says, Pastor, I'd really like to speak. Okay, great, go clean the toilets for 6 months. Let's see where your heart is. Are you doing this for yourself? Do you think that your talents will get you praise? Or are you doing this on behalf of the sheep, for the sheep, to care for them? So that's our heart for you. Why? Because that's the shepherd's heart for you. He wants you to be known. He wants you to be loved. How do we know that? Look at the next two verses. John 10 continues, verse 14 and 15. He says, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Now listen to this in verse 15. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Now this word know, in the Greek, it's the word for an experiential knowing. It means we know each other. I'll distinguish this in just a second from another word, know. There's two different words. This one is the word know that's not just you know information about, but you know. Other places in the Bible, and I know this is a mixed crowd sometimes, this is why we have kids services, because sometimes there's things we cover in here that kids need to hear from you, not necessarily from me. And this word know in the Bible is used for relationships. It's used to describe what happens when a man and woman come together and are one flesh. So Jesus says, my sheep know me. They don't have information about me, they know me. They're in relationship with me, and I'm in relationship with them. And then he qualifies it. He says, just as my Father knows me, and I know my Father. Do you understand how astounding of a statement that is? That phrase there, just as, means to the degree of. Jesus is saying, to the same degree that the Father and the Son know each other, experience each other, love each other. To that degree, you and I can know Jesus. And we can be known by Jesus. That's what he means when he says, I came to give you life. Jesus is saying, I'm laying down my life so you can be known, so you can be loved, so you can be in relationship with me in the same way that I'm in relationship with my Father. Wow. Jesus is saying you can experience what me and my dad experience. you can experience the relationship that him and I experience and that we have experienced for all eternity. That's what he's inviting us into. He wants us to be known. And he wants us to know relationally. Now, John chapter 10, I told you this week one if you were here, happens because of what happened in John chapter 9. I don't know if you know the way numbers work, but 10 comes after 9. That was deep, wasn't it? Sometimes deepness is the most simple thing. You just never saw the deepness of it. So 10 comes after 9. So to understand chapter 10, you got to understand chapter 9. And in chapter 9, it's the story of a blind guy that Jesus healed. He gave him sight. And then the religious leaders get together and they debate whether or not Jesus can do what he did, which I said is what church people do a lot. Can Jesus do that? He's Jesus. Who are you to debate what he does? And then they're questioning. The religious people are questioning what Jesus came to do, what Jesus came to give. And so they pull the blind guy aside and they start grilling him. They start grilling him. And they start questioning him. And I just want us to pick up on a little bit. So turn back to John chapter 9. I'm gonna read a couple verses to you. Look at verse 24 and verse 25. It says, the second time they, that's the religious leaders, summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God by telling the truth, they said. We know, there's that word, we know that this man is a sinner, he replied. Whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. Now, amazingly, we don't pick this up in English, but amazingly, all three instances of that word know is a different Greek word than chapter 10 know. This word is not to know experientially, it's not to be in relationship with, it's to know informationally. It's to know it mentally. And these religious leaders are bragging about what information they have. And that's what bugs me sometimes about religious people. They brag about their information, but they don't know anybody. They know a lot, but they don't know a lot. You know what I'm saying? See what I did there? They know informationally, but they're not in relationship. They don't know the sheep. They don't care for the sheep. They didn't care for this blind guy. And this blind guy responds with, I don't know if he's a sinner or not. I don't know informationally. All I know informationally is I was blind, now I see. That's all I know, homie. I couldn't see, now I can see. That's all I know. And then they kick him out. But the story doesn't end there. Look down in chapter 9, verse 35 through 38. Listen to what Jesus does with this blind guy. And if you see this, you will understand why he came. Jesus heard that they had thrown him out. And when he found him, so Jesus goes looking for the guy he healed. When he found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? Who is he, sir? The man asked. Tell me so that I may believe in him. Verse 37, listen to this. Listen to the absolute unbelievable irony. Jesus says, you have now seen him. Earlier that day, could that dude see? Yes or no? No. He couldn't see. So Jesus healed his eyes so he could see. He says, you've seen him now. In fact, Jesus says, he is the one speaking with you. Then the man said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. Here's what Jesus does. Catch this. The man knew about Jesus. He had information about him. And the information he had was, he gave me sight. But the man didn't know Jesus. He didn't know him. He hadn't experienced relationship with him. So here's what Jesus does. Jesus heals his eyes so that he can heal his heart. He healed his eyes so that the guy could see. But Jesus wasn't content in stopping there. Jesus goes and finds the dude. Why? Because he's a good shepherd. He laid down his life for this guy. And he says, I want you to believe. I want you to know. Not know up here, know in here. Not have information about me, but know me. Be in relationship with me. And then the guy says, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped. See, the guy had been healed physically, but not spiritually. And here's why I'm stressing all this. Some of you, you know about Jesus. You've heard about him. You got information about him. You know Jesus the way I know President Barack Obama. I know he's my president. I know what he looks like. I know where he lives. But I don't know him. I got a relationship in the fact that he's my president. He's authority, but I don't know him. I don't have a cell phone number. He doesn't call me. We don't talk. I don't know him. And unfortunately, that's how some of you know Jesus. You know he's God. You know about him. You've heard about him. But you've been so turned off because you've just unfortunately dealt with a lot of hired hands in your day. A lot of people that didn't care for you. A lot of people that didn't take the time to be with you when you were attacked. And all I'm trying to say is this, is Jesus comes after you, and that's what he's doing right now. He's not content for you to know about him. He wants you to know him, believe in him. Why? That's why he laid down his life. In just a second, we're gonna take communion. In fact, you can go ahead and get these elements out. We passed them out earlier at the door. If you didn't get one, we've got people that are walking around. Just raise your hand, they'll give you one. But in just a second, we're gonna take each one of these. And here's what I want you to know. That this little wafer, it tastes horrible. I want you to know that. If you're hungry, this ain't gonna do nothing physically. But this represents Jesus' body that was broken for you, pierced for you, crushed for you. For you. He gave his body so that your body could be raised from the dead. He gave his body so that your body could experience relationship with him forever. This juice, it represents his blood. He gave his blood because without the shedding of blood, there can't be forgiveness of sins, without a price being paid. So his body was broken and his blood was spilled. Why? He laid it down for you. He tithed himself for you. He sacrificed himself for you. Why? So that you could have life and have it to the full. And there's some of you, like I said, that you know that, but you don't know that. And so before we take this, we're gonna pray. And if you don't know Jesus, if you haven't come to that place where you said, Lord, I believe, I'm gonna respectfully ask you not to take this. Our eyes will be closed so nobody will know. You can hide it in your pocket if you want. Because I don't want you to heap condemnation on yourself. I don't want you to act like you believe something that you really don't. Those are called hypocrites, and nobody likes hypocrites. But I'm gonna give you an opportunity to know him. I'm gonna give you an opportunity to pray and confess just like this blind guy did and say, Lord, I believe, and worship him. But then there's some of you in this room, you know it. You don't just know it, you know it. You've experienced it. But you just gotta be reminded of it. This is why we take communion several times a year. Because Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me. Remembrance of my life that I laid down. Remembrance of where I'm leading you. I'm leading you into life. You can trust me because I gave my life to lead yours. So we need to be reminded of that.